Chapter 121, Hidden Dungeon 1. Hoo-woo. Yawning, a white mist escaped from my mouth. Although it was midwinter, only now that I was awake early in the morning did I fully realize that winter was upon me. Perhaps it was because I was less sensitive to the cold, it never truly hit me until now that it was already that time of the year. 6:30 a.m. Checking my watch, I rubbed my hands together as I sat on a bench. Currently, I was at the train station, patiently waiting for the air train to arrive. Moreover, apart from waiting for the air train, I was also waiting for someone to come. Kevin. I had already texted him beforehand that I was waiting for him today at the train station. Although the events with Gilbert had happened not so long ago, he should have already made a full recovery. Therefore he should be able to make it without a problem. The only thing that I wanted to know was whether he received my message or not. TSSSS. It's snowing. Snapping me out of my thoughts, extending my hand forward, I watched as an ice crystal gently landed on my jacket and melted straight after. Glancing at the falling snow in the sky, I couldn't help but softly mumble to myself. 5 months, huh? I've been in this world for 5 months. Watching the ice crystals continuously fall from the sky and land on my jacket, I couldn't help but look back at what had happened these past few months. Time sure flies. Going from a reclused introvert to exploring dungeons, creating companies, finding comrades, meeting a new family. Really, fate is truly strange in many ways. Who could have ever guessed that my life would change so much in a matter of 5 months? I really couldn't explain how I felt at this moment. Everything sort of felt like a blur. Vroom. Snapping me out of my thoughts, the sound of an air train gently landing on the platform of the station resounded across the area I was in. Frowning slightly, I glanced around me. However, noticing that I was the only person in the station, I couldn't help but be slightly disappointed. Did I perhaps miscalculate? I really thought that Kevin would have without a doubt shown up considering what had happened with Gilbert, but did I perhaps misjudge something? Shaking my head, I discarded such a notion. No, I created Kevin, how could I have judged wrongly? Perhaps he was still on his way and something was holding him up. Like for example, an old grandma had fallen down the stairs and he was helping her stand up. 6:34 a.m. Glancing at my watch, and seeing that there was only a minute left before the air train left, my brows knit tightly. Just where in the wadash? Am I late? Just as I was about to give up and leave the train station and go back to the lock, I heard a voice coming from behind me. Without looking behind me to see who the voice belonged to, I smiled and said, "Just barely. Lock station, departing." Clank! As the doors of the air train closed, lifting up in the air, it soon smoothly picked up its speed and disappeared into the distance. Sitting on the opposite ends to each other in the air train, Kevin and I quietly looked at the ever-changing scenery outside of the train. Neither one of us spoke a word. Currently, the world outside was now dyed in white as the snow coated the rooftops of every building and house in the distance. It looked truly beautiful. Glancing away from the window, I couldn't help but notice how empty the train was as apart from me and Kevin, no one was present. Perhaps because it was early in the morning or because the destination was far, the train was completely empty. After a while, breaking the silence, Kevin looked at me for a couple of seconds before saying, "So, where are we going?" Looking back at Kevin, without answering him immediately, I responded with a question of my own. "Before that, can I take your presents as you agreeing to my deal?" Hearing my question, Kevin didn't reply immediately. Staring at his feet for a couple of seconds, clenching his fists tightly, he eventually nodded. "Yes." "Great." Seeing Kevin nod his head, a big smile appeared on my face. Resting my cheek on my hand, I calmly said, "We're going to the Clayton Ridge." Surprised, Kevin's brows couldn't help but shoot upwards. The Clayton Ridge?
Yeah.
The same place where I got the Seed of Limit and the Keiki style. However, contrary to last time, I was going on further upwards of the Clayton Ridge. The Clayton Ridge was huge, and when I mean huge, I mean huge. We're talking like thousands of kilometers long. Compared to the place where I took the Seed of Limit and Keiki style, I was actually headed a lot further than that. About a 3 hours journey from the lock, approximately 1,800 kilometers in terms of distance. Glancing at me in confusion, Kevin couldn't help but frown as he asked, "Is that where the sword art is?" Smiling, I nodded my head in confirmation. "Yup, and we're going to the middle part, so you better rest as much as you can, as you're going to need to save up all your energy for when the real challenge comes." Once again looking at me in confusion, Kevin asked, "Challenge?" Shaking my head, as I leaned on the window and stared at the world outside that was dyed in white, a light chuckle escaped from my mouth. "What? You're telling me that you expected me to just give you a 5-star sword art without putting in any effort? In the first place, I was only bringing him to the place where the 5-star manual was located. If I had the 5-star manual with me, I wouldn't have asked for him to meet me this early in the morning to go the Clayton Ridge." Understanding this, opening his mouth, Kevin tried to find words to say, but after a while, he shook his head and said, "No, I get it." Raising my brow and noticing Kevin's crestfallen expression, patting him on the shoulder, I reassured him. "Don't worry, I've got it all planned out, so you will definitely get your sword art. After all, if you don't get it, I won't go to Amora." Looking up at me for a couple of seconds, Kevin nodded his head and softly said, "Okay. Just relax for now and let me handle the rest." Staring at Kevin in front of me, I couldn't help but sigh inwardly. I could tell that what had happened with Gilbert had taken a toll on his mental state. As we spoke, I couldn't help but notice the impatience in Kevin's voice. Although he was trying to hide it, his subtle gestures, such as the way he clenched his fists or nervously looked outside the window from time to time, were enough of an indication for me to understand his mental state at the moment. He was definitely desperate to increase his strength so that never again would he feel so weak and desperate at the hands of someone else. I too shared the same sentiment as him, as I understood how being powerless felt. It wasn't that great of a feeling, if I had to be honest. Fortunately for him, I wasn't lying when I said that I had everything planned out. If things will go according to my plans, perhaps this could be one of the easiest dungeon raids in history. Touching the insides of my jacket, I felt a thick rectangular object resting in between my body and jacket. Clenching it tightly, I couldn't help but think to myself, this will be the key to completing the dungeon without any problems. Desiccation, Clayton Ridge, Roa. Wawa. Lazily stretching my body, I glanced at Kevin and with my hand nudged him to stand up. "We're here." "All right." Nodding his head, Kevin stood up and followed me out of the air train. After 3 hours of sitting on a train, Kevin finally calmed down and returned to his regular serious self.
Ha!
Instantly, as soon as I stepped foot outside of the train, a wave of fresh air brushed against my body, causing me to slightly relax. Compared to the polluted air of the city, the air here was much cleaner and fresher. It truly felt great. Disrupting my moment of peace, Kevin spoke. "So where are we going?" Glancing at Kevin, I pointed towards the town below us and suggested, "Let's first grab something to eat in the town below before going to our destination. Trust me, the walk is going to be very long." Thinking for a bit, Kevin eventually nodded his head. Although he wasn't sure about where they were currently going, if the road was as harsh as Ren made it out to be, then it wouldn't hurt to fill their stomachs before leaving. "If you say so." Chapter 122, Hidden Dungeon, 2. Inside of a densely packed forest, two individuals calmly walked through the heavy vegetation. Of the two individuals, one stood at the front looking at a large map made out of paper, whilst behind him, another individual followed him with a confused look on his face. "Are you sure we're headed in the right direction?" Scratching my chin, as I looked at the map before me. Tilting the map sideways, with a hint of doubt I responded.
Should be."
Taken aback, Kevin couldn't help but say. "Why, you, don't tell me that we're lost." "No, well, maybe. But most likely not." Smack. Face-palming, an extended sigh escaped from Kevin's mouth. He was starting to regret his decision. Not even halfway through the journey and they were already lost. Just what kind of guide was this? Noticing Kevin's action, I shrugged my shoulders. In my defense, I didn't have much to work with. Although I had a general idea of where the dungeon was, well, let's just say that a lot of the important information on how Kevin found the dungeon was skipped in the novel. After all, back then when I was writing this part of the story, I basically directly skipped to the moment Kevin found the dungeon. Thus, because of how lazy I was back then, I was currently in a pickle. Fortunately, I had a few reference points to work with. A river, a large bent tree and a cave. Those were the things I was looking out for. Kiam, can I just ask why you're using a paper map instead of your phone?" Coughing a couple of times, Kevin glanced at me and asked me something that had been on his mind ever since leaving the small town below. Looking back at Kevin, brushing my hair to the side, I lazily said, "What difference does it make? In the end, with this, I can just save my phone's battery." Taking out my phone and pointing towards the top right corner, I said. "Moreover, good luck finding a signal in the middle of nowhere." Raising his hands in resignation, Kevin said, "All right, do whatever makes you comfortable." I was just curious as I've never seen anyone use paper maps anymore. Briefly glancing at Kevin, I shook my head and continued to observe the map. Fair enough. I would have used my phone if there was a GPS signal that would directly show me the path I had to go. Sadly, such a thing didn't exist. So, I just chose to use a map as that was what I used to use back on Earth. I guess old habits never die. Let's see. Crouching down on the ground and placing the map on a rock, I squinted my eyes and made sure I was still on the right track. If I'm not wrong, we are actually headed in the right direction, and all we needed to do is walk for a couple of more kilometers until we find a river. Turning the map slightly, I traced a blue line on the map stopping until a certain point. Thereafter, we are to walk along the river all the way until we find the largest tributary and from there go hike up until an oddly bent tree can be found. The cave of the dungeon should be right behind the tree. All right, I've got it, follow me. Cross-referencing with the map a couple of more times, I nodded my head and urged Kevin to follow me. "You've figured things out?" "Yup, if nothing goes wrong, we should be able to arrive there in about half a day." "All right. So this is the place?" "Yep." Standing in front of a large bent tree, Kevin and I sat down on the ground and recuperated some energy. The sun had already started to set and night was quickly arriving. Taking a couple of energy bars from my dimensional space, I handed one to Kevin and opened another one for myself. "Here." "Thanks." Taking the energy bar, Kevin quickly opened it and took big bites out of it. Looking at the cave hidden behind the tree, he couldn't help but ask, "So is this the place?" Munch, yep. Scarfing down the energy bar in my mouth, I quickly nodded my head. After walking for half a day and following the instructions that I had written in my novel, I was quickly able to find the right location. Moreover, now that Kevin was here, using my book as a reference point, I was able to correct any mistakes I made. Regarding the book, I had to say, future me was really smart. Whenever I went in the wrong direction, I would always just shout "wrong direction," and with me seeing this in the book, I was able to discard that path and quickly find the right path in no time. Hats off to you, future me. All right, let's go. After resting for 10 minutes whilst recuperating some of the energy we spent hiking all the way here, standing up, I urged Kevin to follow me. Patting his pants, Kevin nodded his head and stood up. Okay. Thus, the two of us walked through the cave. The formation was perfect. Kevin at the front and me at the back. With Kevin's overwhelming abilities, he should be able to take care of any monster that showed up before us, and I, with my sword art, could swiftly deal with the mob-like monsters present. Well, that was if I was planning on doing anything. In reality, there really shouldn't be much for me to do. Patting the book in my hand, I couldn't help but smile. What's the point of wasting time fighting monsters when you can just skip them? After walking for a while, we stopped at a fork road. There were 8 paths to choose from and they each looked identical. Turning around, Kevin glanced at me as he asked, "Which path should we take?" Without hesitation, I immediately pointed towards the 5th pathway. The 5th one. This time I was confident with my answer as from the moment we entered the cave, I knew exactly where to go. Moreover, stop. Huh? After walking for 5 minutes, placing my hand on Kevin's shoulder to stop him, ignoring the confusion in his face, I placed my finger in my mouth and quietly whispered, "As soon as you turn left, 2 horned sheep will immediately attack you." Pausing slightly and glancing downwards, towards my red book, I continued. "There is 1 male and 1 female sheep. The female sheep will wait from behind whilst the male sheep will be the one that will attack you first. The safest and most efficient way to get rid of them would be for you to immediately duck down and stab towards the male's stomach, and whilst the dash." Cutting me off mid-sentence, Kevin couldn't help but look at me weirdly. Wait, what are you talking about?" Raising my brow, I nonchalantly said, "I'm just telling you what will happen and what you should be doing to quickly resolve the upcoming danger."
Yeah.
I get that part. What I don't get is how you know all of this. Moreover, what are you doing with your hands?" Tilting my head, I glanced at Kevin in confusion. "I'm reading? How can you read when there's nothing in your hands?" Huh? Glancing at Kevin in confusion, I waved the red book in his face. Although for obvious reason I wasn't going to show him the contents of the book, I wasn't going to hide its existence. After all, I was going to use it quite often whenever he was around. I mean, it's not like I could hide a thick red book in plain sight. I, of course, didn't need to use the book as Kevin could probably finish the dungeon alone, but why would I not want to exploit this cheat if it saved time? If you have cheat, use it. That was my motto. Still, although one should use their cheat, they shouldn't do it carelessly as that could lead to bad consequences. Especially if it was a book that allowed someone to see 10 minutes in the future, things could get quite messy. Actually, considering that it only displayed Kevin's future, I guess it wasn't that tempting for others. Either way, as I dangled the book in front of Kevin's face and seeing the blank look on his face, I realized that something was wrong. Can't you see this?" "See what?" Squinting my eyes, I was taken aback for a moment. "He can't see it?" Surprised by this discovery, a faint smile appeared on my lips. Interesting. I didn't know that the book had this other function. I guess it made sense if you thought about it. After all, this was an item that wasn't supposed to belong to this world. It wasn't strange that Kevin couldn't see it. Still, this made things much easier for me. So? Snapping me out of my thoughts was Kevin's confused voice. Realizing that I was looking like a complete fool, smiling at Kevin, I brushed my behavior off as a joke. "I'm kidding, was just messing around." Frowning slightly, Kevin didn't bother asking anymore. "All right." Though I wasn't joking about the horned sheep part. Huh? Didn't I tell you I had a skill that enabled me to see in the future? Taken aback for a moment, and recalling the conversation I had with him a week prior, Kevin nodded his head slightly. How could he forget? One of his biggest secrets was exposed because of this.
Yeah.
So you're telling me that you just used your skill? Nodding my head, I quickly pushed Kevin forward and urged him to follow my instruction. Bingo. So quickly do as I told you. Sigh. Sighing out loud, taking out his sword, Kevin nodded his head. Okay. Chapter 123, Hidden Dungeon, 3. Hoo. Standing on top of two giant furry carcasses, Kevin exhaled as turbid air escaped from his mouth. By the side of his face, a droplet of sweat dripped down from his cheek. Good job. Looking upwards, I couldn't help but praise Kevin. It only took him 2 minutes to dispatch 2 ranked monsters. Although he had my instructions, it was still a very impressive feat, something that I, with my strength, could probably not be able to achieve. At least not without some preparations. Spurt. Removing his sword from the carcass of one of the 2 horned sheep, Kevin jumped down and moved next to me. Arriving before me, looking at me straight in the eyes, Kevin slowly said, "So it's true." Taken aback by his sudden action, I couldn't help but ask. What's true? The fact that you can see the future. Stopping for a second, I nodded my head.
Yeah.
I guess you could put it that way. With the aid of the book, I really could look into the future. Albeit only 10 minutes, it was still a small glimpse into the future. Glancing at Kevin, who seemed to be more convinced about his decision, I smiled inwardly. I guess this worked out in my favor. With the aid of the book, I managed to thoroughly convince Kevin about what I had previously told him. This could probably help me explain a few things in the future when I was planning on scamking, making more deals with him in the future. Anyhow, that aside, let's see if there's anything good. Spurt. Walking towards the 2 horned sheep, I took out my sword and stabbed it straight towards where their heart was. Let's see. I was currently looking for a core. Because one of the requirements for going to Amora was a ranked core, I obviously needed to find one. Therefore, what better way to get one than through monsters that the protagonist killed? With his luck, there was a high chance I could find one today. Not so far from where I was, staring at me in confusion, Kevin couldn't help but ask. What are you looking for? Snapping my head in his direction, pointing towards the area I was cutting, I rolled my eyes. Isn't it obvious? Frowning slightly, after a bit of thought, Kevin carefully said. A core?
Yeah.
Spurt. Nodding my head, I no longer paid any attention to Kevin and turned my attention back towards the sheep. Either way, even if I didn't find a core, I could still sell the sheep for a good amount of money. Staring at me working hard at dissecting the horned sheep, Kevin wiped off the blood on his sword. Oh, okay. If you find one, you can keep it. Take it as extra payment for helping me. No need to share it. Thanks. Smiling at Kevin, I thanked him. However, that was merely a fake smile on my side, as I couldn't help but curse at him inwardly. Overpowered cheat-like bastard. Screw you and your system. With the aid of the system, Kevin could literally purchase any type of monster core that he wanted. All he had to do was use the shop feature in the system. Though it required points which he could earn from the quests the system granted him, he could still pretty much get whatever core he wanted without going through the hassle of saving money or going on a monster genocide. Therefore, to him, although monster cores were valuable, it wasn't enough of a temptation. After all, he wasn't really in need of money, as he had all the resources he could ask for from the system. The more I thought about it, the more I couldn't help but curse at myself. Just what in the world was I thinking when I wrote the novel? Fortunately, prior to entering the dungeon, Kevin and I had an agreement with one another that I would keep all the spoils from the dungeon raid. To which he nodded without hesitation. After all, the value of a 5-star sword manual was immeasurable. Slash. Slash. Hacking away at the horned sheep, for the next 10 minutes or so I tried to look for any sign of a core. However, after pretty much dissecting the whole sheep, I could only bitterly smile as I lowered my sword in defeat. Find anything? Nope. Patting me in the shoulder, Kevin encouraged me. Better luck next time. Shaking my head, I wanted to curse at him, but I eventually gave up. Wasn't worth the energy. Let's go, we still have a lot of distance to cover. Pointing further into the cave, I urged for him to follow me. Sheathing his sword back in his scabbard, Kevin nodded his head. All right. Walking deeper into the dungeon, placing my hand on Kevin's shoulder once again, I stopped him. Stop for a second. Grabbing a small rock from the ground, closing my right eye as I measured the distance in front of me, I took a step back and tossed the rock. Tlack. Swoosh. 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 At the same time the rock hit the ground, multiple sharp and unnatural objects flew to the other side of the wall and impaled themselves onto the hard bedrock at the opposite end. All right, let's go. Glancing at the sharp arrows that dug deep into the bedrock for a second, I urged Kevin to follow along. Those were poison-coated arrows that could kill even a ranked user if not careful. Unfazed by the current happenings, Kevin followed along. This wasn't the first time this had happened. In fact, this was already the 4th time that Ren discovered the traps and quickly disabled them. Oddly enough, the traps that were so well hidden didn't seem to bother Ren one bit as he just nonchalantly triggered them left and right. It was almost like he could see the traps. Just what in the world is he? The more Kevin was with Ren, the bigger the confusion grew. He really couldn't get a read on him no matter how much he tried. In the end, Kevin gave up. His main focus right now was the 5-star sword art. Everything else came afterward. As they kept moving forward, around 2 hours into the dungeon, Kevin couldn't help but finally realize by what I meant when I said that there wouldn't be any problems even if we went to Amora. If they could avoid the danger, there really wouldn't be any issues regardless of how strong the monsters present were. Moreover, whenever there were monsters, I would quickly instruct him on what to do and thereafter following my instructions Kevin would make quick work of the monsters. If I had to say so myself, we really worked well together. I would also help Kevin on occasions during fights. That was whenever there were too many monsters, or when a monster ambushed him from a blind spot. Glancing at Kevin who was quietly following along lost in his own world, I quietly muttered. We should be close to the main area of the dungeon, so follow closely, okay? Slowing down his footsteps, Kevin tilted his head and asked. Main area? Nodding my head, I responded.
Yeah.
Currently, we were still on the outskirts of the dungeon. Actually, to even say we were in the dungeon would be a bit of a stretch. It was more like the tutorial part of a game before the game actually started. To really enter the dungeon we need to first complete the tutorial area.
Shh.
Placing my finger in my mouth, halting my steps, I put my hand to the side and indicated to Kevin to stop moving. We're here. Currently, we were at the end of a tunnel, right before the entrance of where the first boss of the dungeon was located. Leaning against the edge of the tunnel, stealthily peeking behind the edge of the wall, I soon noticed a furry creature resting at the center of the room. Flashing its terrifying eyes and flickering its tongue was a monster known as the Hodag. A monster that came from American folklore. The Hodag was a fearsome critter-type creature that resembled a large bull-horned carnivore with a row of thick curved spines that protruded down its back. A thick green fur coated the monster's body as its 2 large fangs dripped saliva on the ground. According to legends, the hodag was said to be born from the ashes of cremated oxen, as the incarnation of the accumulation of abuse the animals had suffered at the hands of their masters. At least that's what was written on the monster encyclopedia. As I studied the monster from the area I was in, I also made sure to take note of anything important in the surroundings. Like if there were other monsters present, the rank of the monster, and what type of terrain the monster was resting on. Glancing at the beast from the corner of the wall, by the size of its body, it seemed to be around rank at best. Kevin should be able to handle it, albeit with a little bit of difficulty. The reason why defeating the hodag was crucial was because once we defeated the hodag, the scenery around us should change. It might look like a cave at first, but once we kill the hodag, everything around us should change as we will be teleported towards a different area of the dungeon. The main area of the dungeon and where the Levi Shaw style could be found. What's the plan? Touching my chin as I contemplated for a couple of seconds, I glanced at Kevin who was behind me. Moving back, I nudged him with my head and told him to look. Take a look. Nodding his head, peeking from the corner of the wall, Kevin's brows furrowed. Is that a hodag? Nodding my head, I crossed my arms and softly said.
Yeah.
And also the key to getting your 5-star sword art. Staring at me seriously, without asking any questions, Kevin nodded his head and asked. Okay, so what do you want me to do? Hearing Kevin's question, as if I was stating the most obvious thing, I slowly said. Kill it, of course. Chapter 124, Hidden Dungeon, 4. Glancing at the hodag peacefully resting in the middle of the cave, looking back at me, in a low voice Kevin asked. So once we kill it we get to the main dungeon area? Nodding my head in affirmation, I responded.
Yeah.
After we kill the Real challenge begins. Alright, if it's only a hodag, it shouldn't be that hard. Hup. Nodding his head in understanding, Kevin summoned his sword. Thereafter, tensing his leg muscles, he directly shot towards the hodag. Hew up. Arriving before the hodag, without hesitation, Kevin swung his sword towards its tail. The most dangerous part of the monster. Clank. Queak. A loud metallic sound resounded across the dungeon, followed by a loud screeching sound. Soon after, like a whip, the hodag's tail shot towards Kevin who swiftly moved backward and dodged it. Unbothered by the commotion that was happening, standing not so far from where Kevin was, glancing at the book, I quickly gave Kevin instructions. Kevin, in a couple of seconds the hodag's tail will come at you once again, take one step back and aim towards its left flank, near its leg. That's its weak spot. Roger that. Nodding his head, Kevin gripped his sword more tightly. Swoosh. And just like I had stated, the hodag's tail came swinging towards Kevin. It was so fast that only a blur could be seen. The way the tail curved in the air as well as the sound that it produced as it moved, reminded me of a whip. Gotcha. Whop. Listening to what I had said, taking a step back, Kevin narrowly avoided the tail. Thereafter, without skipping a beat, Kevin shot like a bullet and aimed towards the left side of the hodge. Spurt. Like a knife cutting through butter, Kevin's sword inserted itself into the hodag's left leg area. Green blood spurted everywhere and a loud enraged roar shook the dungeon. Queak-eek. Swoosh. Off you go. Creating a circle with my sword, a translucent ring appeared before me. With a flick of my fingers, I whistled at Kevin who nodded his head and jumped upwards. Thanks. Doing a backflip in the air, a couple of meters above the hodag, Kevin skillfully dodged the beast's tail that was trashing the ground below in a berserk state. Without hesitation, twisting his body in the air, Kevin's foot perfectly landed on my ring, and subsequently after, he propelled his body downwards with his sword aimed towards the skull of the hodag. Bomb. Like a meteor, Kevin shot towards the hodag. Watching Kevin perform this from below, I couldn't help but be impressed by his agility and flexibility. Without me needing to tell him what he had to do, he perfectly understood the intent behind me placing a ring in the air. Talking about the ring, after I trained with it a bit more, I found out that it could also be used as a place to step in the air. Though I haven't tried on it for myself, it worked multiple times with Kevin. I should definitely take note of this feature for the future. Queek eek. Crashing around the dungeon, the hodag maniacally looked for anything to direct its anger towards. Soon after, spotting me in the distance, the hodag's eyes turned scarlet red as it quickly headed in my direction. Glancing at the hodag that was heading in my direction, unbothered by it, I leaned back and lazily yawned. I then proceeded to coat my body with mana. Hoo-woo am. Queek eek. Bomb. Just as the hodag was about to reach me, like a meteor, Kevin crashed onto the top of the hodag's head and green blood sprayed everywhere. TSSSSSSS. As the green blood splashed against the coat of mana covering my body, steam slowly raised in the air.
Yeah.
The hodag's blood was very acidic. With his sword deeply imbued into the hodag's body, Kevin slowly closed his eyes and exhaled. Hoo. Looking at the now dead hodag below Kevin, I lightly applauded. Well done. Opening his eyes, Kevin looked at me and asked. What next? We just why? Rumble. Right on cue, just as I was about to tell Kevin what was going to happen next, the whole dungeon shook. Thereafter, as if we had entered a portal, both Kevin and I lost our senses, and the world around us turned dark. Voom. KHHH. Holding onto the side of my stomach, I grimaced in pain. Though it wasn't the first time I went through this, I was still not used to the sensation of being transported around. It felt as though my body was pulverized to then be reconstructed in a completely different place. Wasn't pleasant. Is this the middle area of the dungeon? Standing not so far from where I was, Kevin, who seemed to be completely unfazed, looked around the new environment we were in. Brushing my hair to the side, I too looked around the dungeon. Covering my eyes with my hand, a clear blue sky with a pale yellow sun met my sight. Tall towering trees stood next to us, and heavy vegetation filled with herbs and flowers appeared all over the place. It was an oddly beautiful sight. The new environment was a stark different compared to the other dungeons I had been in. It somehow looked normal. Still, just because it looked normal didn't mean I should let my guard down. We were after all, in a pocket dimension that connected to the demon world. This place was filled with monsters. So where are we going? Frowning, I looked around me. After a bit of thinking, I pointed towards the east and urged Kevin to follow along. This way. Okay. Nodding his head, Kevin followed without hesitation. After what had happened previously in the dungeon, Kevin was more than convinced by my abilities. As long as it wasn't something that didn't seem unreasonable, he wasn't going to dispute my decisions anymore. Noticing his attitude, I smiled to myself. Good. Convincing him that I wasn't a scammer was one of the main goals I had set for myself when proposing this deal. Moreover, with him being less apprehensive towards me, I could use this to my advantage in the future to avoid unnecessary problems. Ren, stop. Snapping me out of my thoughts, Kevin placed his hand on my shoulder as he pointed forward. Don't get lost in your own thoughts, there are monsters over there. Looking at the direction of where Kevin was pointing at, not so far from where Kevin and I were, a group of light blue translucent flame-like things levitated near the ground. Frowning slightly, I couldn't help but tilt my head in confusion as I said. Aren't those just ranked will-o-wisps? If I didn't remember wrongly, wisps were probably some of the easiest monsters to get rid of inside F dungeons because of their inability to move fast. Moreover, they were only rank Even I could take care of them without batting an eye. Shaking his head, Kevin pointed towards the wisp-like creatures. This time, as he spoke, his voice contained a rare trace of solemnity. What do you mean just will-o-wisps? Look carefully at their color. If you pay close attention you can tell that those are not wisps but in fact, ranked night lizards. Wisp's flames are dark blue whilst the one over there is light blue. Therefore, we can easily deduce that they are in fact the ranked monsters night lizards, which are on a completely different level to wisps. Now that you pointing this out they really do seem to be night lizards. Touching my chin and taking a better look at the wisp-like objects, I finally realized that Kevin was in fact right. Ranked monster, night lizard. A monster that hunted in groups. Because of the blue flame around their body, they were often mistaken for wisps, and because of this fact, many heroes had died at their hands. With their incredible speed, they were almost impossible to kill unless someone else had the equivalent or an even faster speed to them. Moreover, as they hunted in groups, they terrified even ranked heroes who could barely keep up with their speeds. Kevin's apprehension towards them was understandable. Seeing that I understood, Kevin stared at the night lizards from the distance and started speaking to me. So we need to be careful when handling this as their incredibly fast speeds can even, Just as Kevin was about to finish formulating his plan, a clicking sound resounded across the area he was in. Click! The second movement of the Keiki-style, horizon-splitting slash. Soon after, a bright light instantly dyed the surroundings in white. Thereupon, after the light died down, the clean dissected bodies of the lizard could be found sprawled all over the ground. Done, let's go. With my hand still on the sheet of my blade, I smiled at Kevin and moved forward. Standing there speechless for a while, Kevin couldn't help but alternate his head between the lizard's dissected bodies and me. When did he attack? Chapter 125, Hidden Dungeon, 5. Staring at Ren's back for a couple of seconds, Kevin couldn't find any words to say. Though he had a bit of a hunch regarding Ren's strength, when he saw it in person, he was at a loss for words. Fast. So incredibly fast and efficient. Although his attention wasn't directed towards Ren at the time he attacked, in the blink of an eye, all of the night lizards were killed. Not one was spared. 11 night lizards were dissected in a blink of an eye. Something that would have taken him quite a while to accomplish. Recalling the lightning-fast attack that came from behind him, Kevin couldn't help but think to himself. Could I have stopped that? Closing his eyes, Kevin envisioned himself defending himself against that attack. In the end, after a couple of seconds, he shook his head. He didn't know. Perhaps when he was fully alert he could, but if he wasn't paying attention. Stopping his thoughts there, Kevin didn't want to think about it. Just the thought of him facing such lightning-fast attack made him shudder. Hoo. Taking a deep breath and looking at Ren walking up front, Kevin had so many questions in his mind, but he refrained from voicing them out. Everyone had their secret, and he knew this fact better than anyone else. After all, he was hiding a pretty big secret himself. Although he didn't know why Ren was trying to hide his strength, he knew better than anyone to just shut up and go move on. Come on, we still got a bit to cover. Glancing at Kevin who was deep into his own thoughts, a faint smile appeared on my lips. Knowing Kevin, he was most likely comparing himself to me. It was a habit of his. Be it friend or foe, he would always compare his strength to others. It was just engraved into his system. The hot-blooded mindset of a youth seeking to compare himself to someone else and see who was better. That's what Kevin was experiencing. Shaking my head, I couldn't help but bitterly smile. I'm too old for that. Though I also wanted to get stronger, I didn't have the same hot-blooded mindest a youth had. Maybe at times, but usually I preferred to stay calm. Although when I first came into this world I was anything but calm, as I adjusted myself to this place, I somehow regained my confidence and became much calmer. Moreover, well, he was misunderstanding the true extent of my strength. Although the night lizards were indeed creatures that were hard to kill for him, they were a breeze for someone like me who could just kill them with my incredible speed. Either way, it doesn't really matter. I wanted to get over with this dungeon as fast as possible. After all, I had many things to do in preparation for the many tasks I had to complete by the end of the month. Thus, glancing at Kevin, I picked up my speed. Hurry up, we've still got half a day worth of distance to cover. Like that, for about the next 5 hours or so, Kevin and I swiftly moved around the dungeon and killed any monster that obstructed our paths. Of course, whenever we killed a ranked monster, I would quickly skin it alive and try to see if it had a core. However, somehow, Lady Luck wasn't on my side today. Well, that was what I thought until... Q-wee-wee-ee. A loud desperate cry resounded across the forest as Kevin appeared on top of a large bat-like monster. Glancing at the humongous bat that was lying dead on the ground, glancing at me, Kevin asked. This should be the last one, no? Yup, now move aside. Nodding my head, unsheathing my sword, I merrily walked towards the bat and stabbed towards its chest area. Spurt. Watching me skin the bat, Kevin shook his head. Out of the hundreds of monsters they had killed, not one had a core. If there was one thing he learned from Gilbert's class was that finding a core was just as hard as winning the lottery. The chances were almost slim to none. Just give up, the probability of getting a core is really small, so you better just be. Vroom. Vroom. Just as Kevin was telling me to give up, pulling a purple orb-like object that continuously pulsated a purple hue, I raised my brow towards Kevin as a smirk inadvertently appeared on my face. Sorry, I didn't quite get what you were trying to say. Staring at my smirking face, a vein bulged on Kevin's forehead. Trying his best to calm himself down, an awkward smile appeared on his face. Congratulations. MHHHM. Nodding my head in satisfaction, I couldn't help but slowly caress the purple orb in my hand. Did my E+ rank luck finally work? Or was this due to Kevin's luck? Either way, placing the orb in my dimensional space, I merrily walked towards the forest. Let's go. Walking for a further 200 meters, Kevin couldn't help but ask. How much longer do we have to walk? I think we've pretty much crossed half of the dungeon already. Halting my steps in front of a large area filled with large thick green vines, squatting down and placing my hand on the floor, after a couple of seconds, looking up towards Kevin, I slowly said. Actually, we are pretty much already here? Here? Looking around, Kevin couldn't help but be confused as all he saw were thick vines and trees everywhere. In fact, the vegetation was so thick here that he couldn't even see the sun. I don't see anything. Standing up, cracking my neck, I said. That's because you can't see it yet. Slash. Slash. Unsheathing my sword, I then proceeded to hack towards the large vines. Like that, for the next 5 minutes, I continuously cut down the large vines in front of me. Soon after, a large rumbling sound started becoming discernible by both me and Kevin as the ground below us shook slightly. Looking up ahead, and seeing a small light appear from the gaps of the vines, a smile appeared on my face. All right. Slash. Slashing one more time, the scenery before me and Kevin changed one more time as a large waterfall appeared before us. Rumble. Is that a waterfall? Yup. Simultaneously halting our footsteps, Kevin and I watched as an enormous waterfall appeared before us. Surrounded by vines, a pocket-like space that contained a large pond and a waterfall appeared before us. Looking up, we could finally once again see the sun shining down on the land. Splash! Splash! As the water fell and crashed against the hard rocks on the ground, a small rainbow appeared in the area. It was a truly mesmerizing sight. Snapping out of his daze, Kevin looked around and asked, "What do we do now?" Glancing at Kevin, taking off my shirt and pants, without hesitation, I jumped into the small pond below the waterfall. What else aside from swimming? Splash! Soon after I said those words, diving deep into the water, I felt my skin sting due to the cold sensation of the water brushing against my skin. Gritting my teeth and remaining underwater, I waited for Kevin to dive as well. Splash! Not a minute after, Kevin's figure appeared next to me beneath the water. Using my hand to signal him to follow me, using breaststroke, I swam towards the deeper end of the water. As I swam, appearing in my view was a small black tunnel. Glancing at Kevin behind me, and making sure he was following me, I pointed towards the tunnel and swam in it. Looking at the tunnel, Kevin nodded his head and proceeded to follow me. Splash! Splash! Inside of a dark cave, the tranquil pond that did not ripple for years, suddenly rippled as shortly after two large heads appeared from beneath the water. Hoo-ah! Hoo-ah! Appearing from beneath the water, I along with Kevin, heavily gulped for air as we floated in the water. Let's get out, it's a bit too cold. As my teeth chattered, using breaststroke, I moved towards the edge of the pond and quickly got out of the water. Getting out of the water, I couldn't help but shiver due to the cold. Although I was somehow more resistant to the cold, it still didn't prevent me from getting cold. Shortly after, taking out a towel from my dimensional space, I dried my body and put on my clothes. After making sure I had all my clothes on, turning towards Kevin, who was also dressed up, I nodded towards him and moved deeper into the cave. "All right, follow me, we're close." "Okay." Drying his hair with a towel, Kevin nodded his head and followed me into a dark path inside of the cave. As we were walking deeper into the cave, 5 minutes in, a strong residual magical energy could be felt in the air. The closer we walked, the more stifling the atmosphere became. Vroom! Vroom! Opening his eyes wide, feeling the intense magical energy, Kevin looked at me, to which I nodded back. "Yes, we're here." Thereafter, turning right of the passageway, a large purple gate appeared before us. However, contrary to a regular gate, this one had evident signs of human tampering, as thick black pillars appeared on its sides along with some tall statues of what seemed to be gargoyles. Stopping before the large gate, I rubbed my hand together and said, "Welp, this is as far as I can go." Nodding his head slowly, without looking away from the gate, Kevin opened his mouth and quietly asked, "Is this where I can find the sword art?" Nodding my head, I made sure to remind him of a few things that I had previously told him on our way here.
Yeah.
Make sure you follow the instructions that I told you on the way to the dungeon. Only look for a golden book at the center of the palace and don't go anywhere else, as I can't control. Staring at the gate in a daze, most of my words went from one ear to the other. Noticing this, I sighed and just stopped talking. "I'm going." Seeing that I was done talking, Kevin took a step towards the gate.
Bye.
Helplessly smiling, I waved at him. However, just as Kevin was about to enter, recalling something, Kevin turned around and looked at me straight into my eyes. Seriously nodding his head, he solemnly said, "Thank you, if I really get the sword art, I'll keep the end of my deal." Smiling without responding, I watched as Kevin subsequently entered the portal. Vroom! Wham! Watching Kevin's figure disappear into the portal, I lazily yawned and leaned against one of the statues next to the portal. This might take a bit. Chapter 126, Hidden Dungeon, 6. Vwam! Kevin's entire body was enveloped in a golden luster. Soon after, Kevin appeared in a whole new place. KHH, where am I? Glancing around in confusion, Kevin, once again found himself in the middle of a forest. However, this time, in front of him, stood a large majestic palace that towered in the middle of the forest. It reached all the way to the sky as green vines entangled themselves on the side of the walls. At the front of the palace were two giant golden doors that sealed the entrance of the palace. As Kevin looked at the palace from the distance, he was so shocked by the appearance of the palace that he thought he had actually gone back in time, back in the medieval times. The palace still felt as majestic and grand as it would have back when it was just built. This must be the place Ren told me about. Noticing the palace, Kevin remembered everything that Ren told him before entering. From what he would see upon entering the dungeon to what things he needed to avoid and what areas were strictly forbidden. Collecting himself, nodding his head, Kevin walked all the way until he reached the entrance of the palace. According to what Ren had told him, behind the golden doors of the place, was where the 5-star sword art that he was looking for was located. Halting his steps for a split moment, the images of what happened between him and Gilbert replayed in Kevin's mind. As he recalled those images, Kevin couldn't help but clench his fists tightly. Never again. Never again did he want to be humiliated like that. Hoo. Arriving in front of the two golden doors, taking a deep breath and placing his hands on the door, Kevin proceeded to open the two enormous doors. Shein. As he opened the door, a dazzling glow nearly blinded him, making him unable to open his eyes. Covering his eyes to mitigate the impact of the light, with great difficulty, he forced his eyes open and saw vast sculptures sitting in the palace. Each sculpture was different from the others. There was a golden armored knight, an enormous dragon, and all other sorts of fantastical creatures. Under the feet of these giant sculptures was a path that led ahead where the statues of two angels holding onto two harps could be seen. Walking around in a daze, Kevin followed the path and reached a strange altar, where on top, all kinds of books and scrolls that were written with powerfully dense words appeared. Squinting his eyes to get a better look, as Kevin observed the books and scrolls, he could feel the powerful intent in each and every word written inside of those scrolls. Boundless. Those were the words that perfectly described how he felt as he looked towards the books and scroll. He could practically envision an old man sitting on a large spacious desk writing those scrolls with every last part of his remaining life. In the midst of admiring the scrolls and books, sensing something, Kevin noticed that at the very center of this altar was a golden book that shined a golden luster. It pulsated a dense and majestic golden light that almost made it feel as if it was alive. Moreover, compared to the other books, this one seemed to be far more complex. Touching the book with his hand, Kevin's eyes soon became entranced by the two words engraved on it. Levi Shah style. Levi Shah style, Grandmaster Levi Shah. As if everything started to click, Kevin instantly realized what sword this was. Recalling the legends of Grandmaster Levi Shah, a smile inadvertently appeared on his face. Elegant, precise, and concise, this was the perfect sword art that he was looking for. Vuwum. Ha, khhh. Just as Kevin was about to open the book, strange golden energy spread throughout the mysterious book as Kevin's hand became stuck on top of the book. It soon enveloped Kevin completely. Soon after, like a flood, strange images inserted themselves inside of Kevin's mind, causing his eyes to turn white. Kiuwuawa. Shortly after that, Kevin's pained scream resounded across the empty space. Thud. Darkness enveloped Kevin's vision as his body dropped to the ground. Everything turned silent and the book lost its golden luster. Howum. Yawning like there was no tomorrow, I checked my watch and stared at the dungeon behind me. 6 hours. That's how long Kevin was inside of the dungeon. If I wasn't wrong, currently, Kevin was going through Grandmaster Levish's trial. Though it was a tough trial, back in the novel, Kevin successfully managed to pass the trial without much difficulty. Moreover, only upon succeeding would he finally be able to get his hands on the sword art. I doubt he would give up halfway just because the trial was hard. Though he was weaker as compared to the time he actually got the sword art, I wasn't worried. More so than him being the protagonist, I had faith that he could succeed. After all, Kevin's strength 2 months from now shouldn't be that much different. I was sure of this as for the next few months, there were no major events circling him after all. This part of the novel was supposed to be a time skip that directly skipped all the way towards the intra-academy exchange. By the time the arc started, he was still ranked, halfway towards rank. Standing up and walking around the place, recalling something, I knocked on one of the gargoyle statues next to the portal. As I did, I couldn't help but admire the amount of fine detail that was put into them. From the way they were carved and shaped, they almost seemed to be lifelike. Moreover, what made them especially unique were the 2 ruby red eyes that were deeply imbued in the areas where their eyes were supposed to be. It made them look more alive. Shein. Still, without caring too much, putting my hands on top of the heads of the 2 gargoyle statues in front of the portal, channeling my mana into them, they soon shrank and disappeared from where they were, leaving behind nothing but the portal. Clapping my hands together in satisfaction, I gratefully looked towards the portal and thanked Kevin. "We'll be taking this, thank you very much, Kevin." Shein. Extending my hand forward, a miniature version of the gargoyle statue appeared in my hand. It looked exactly like the sculpture from before. However, it was much smaller compared to before. Taking a good look at it, I couldn't help but nod in satisfaction. TSSSS. Biting the tip of my finger, I placed my finger on top of the statue and let the blood dripping from my finger drip on the statue. Shein. Thereafter, as my blood touched the statue, the gargoyle statue's ruby red eyes shone brightly as white steam rose from its body. As white steam released in the air, suddenly, a blinding light covered the whole area around me. Unbothered by the blinding light, my eyes remained fixated on the statue as a blue text appeared on top of the statue. Twin gargoyle statue E rank. There we go. An artifact that was originally supposed to belong to Kevin back in the novel. However, although the statues were indeed taken by Kevin, he actually never used them as I practically forgot about them. Actually more than me forgetting about them, it's more like they were useless to Kevin. After all, they didn't have any outstanding effect apart from the fact that upon setting them on the ground, they could target a specific person and stun them for a split second. Sounded pretty strong there, but there was a critical flaw that made me, as an author back then, unable to properly use them and hence discard them. Problem was that setting them up and activating them from the distance required a lot of effort. It required the enemy to stand in a specific area where the gargoyle's eyes looked towards and had to be set up in advance. This required you to either predict where the enemy was going to stand, or lure them there. Both were extremely hard things to accomplish. Moreover, for someone like Kevin who liked to fight face to face, such an artifact really didn't suit him. Wasn't really sure as to why I even created them in the first place. I guess back then I just really loved overgearing him with artifacts and useless stuff. If I had to say, even for me, the statues weren't really that useful. Considering that I had to set them up beforehand, I doubt I had a good use for them. However, it could still serve as a nice souvenir for my mercenary group office. Moreover, just in case someone comes in, I could activate them and deal with the intruders. Though it was only a split second, for most people it wouldn't mean much, but for me who practice the keiki style, that split second could turn out to be devastating. Putting the statue away and noticing a slight fluctuation in magical energy in the air, I turned around and glanced at the portal behind me. The portal was currently fluctuating wildly as the magical energy in the surroundings intensified by the second. Vroom. Soon after, the portal shone brightly as a dark silhouette weakly walked out of the portal. Recognizing the silhouette as Kevin, I stood up. Walking towards him, I couldn't help but ask. "Did you get it?" Stopping right in front of the gate, glancing at me, after a couple of seconds, Kevin smiled. "Yup, KHH. However, shortly after Kevin exited the portal, stumbling a couple of steps, face first, he fell towards the ground. "Hew up." Grabbing onto Kevin's weak and haggard figure, I looked at his tired figure. Shaking my head, I patted him on the back and slowly said, "You did good." Smiling slightly, before passing out, Kevin softly mumbled, "Thanks." Chapter 127, New Piece 1. Inside of a white space was a tall man with a long gray beard. His shoulder-length white hair gently cascaded over his broad shoulders. His towering back proudly stood like an immovable mountain, and his muscles, which despite his age, seemed to show no sign of aging as hidden within them was a boundless power. Standing shirtless with only a set of long worn-out brown pants, in the white void, a broadsword appeared in the man's hands. Gripping onto the broadsword with his two hands, the old man's muscles bulged. His green veins continuously wiggled as his back expanded, casting a large shadow over the area in front of him. Hoo! Exhaling, turbid air escaped from the old man's mouth as his grip on the sword intensified. Slash! Thereafter, the sound of his hand slowly slashing through the air resounded across the space. His every movement left a faint trace whenever his hand moved. It almost felt as if another illusion of him was mimicking his movements at a slower pace. Slash! Slash! After the first slash came the second, then the third, then the fourth, and then after a while, came the 64th movement. TSSSSSSSS. Raising his sword in the air, behind his back, the old man held onto the sword with both hands as his grip intensified. The veins on his hands and muscles became even more prominent as steam slowly rose from the man's body. Shortly after, the man's body started shrinking as his hair became whiter, and his skin became even more wrinkly. A couple of seconds after, the muscles of the old man's body shrunk completely, leaving behind an old husk of a man that was a far cry from what he was before. TSSSSSSSS. Facing the changes happening to his body, the old man's face remained stoic. Retaining the grip of the broadsword in the air, the old man's weak yet steady figure fiercely stared at what was before him. His gaze, which was full of determination and insanity, stared at the void before him. Jaya! Screaming at the top of his lungs, the old man slashed. As soon as the old man slashed, everything froze. Shortly after, the white space disappeared and the world started to crumble. Gwa! Opening his eyes wide, Kevin sat up straight as he screamed. "My God, can you not scream like that?" Covering my ears with my hand, I couldn't help glare at Kevin, who seemed to have just woken up from a long nightmare. Huh? Hearing my voice, blinking a couple of times, Kevin massaged his forehead. After making sure that everything was within his mind, Kevin glanced at me, asked, "How long was I out?" Taking a look at my watch, I responded, "About 2 hours? If we include the 6 hours you were in the dungeon, I've pretty much spent 8 hours in this place." As I spoke, the annoyance within my voice couldn't be hidden. I mean, I literally waited for almost 8 hours. If not for the gargoyle statues keeping me entertained, I would have long been bored to death. In fact, at one point I did want to wake Kevin up, but no matter what I tried to do to wake Kevin up, his body refused to budge. Be it kick, slap, or scream, nothing worked. Having exhausted all means, I eventually just gave up and sat down in defeat. Sitting up straight, Kevin asked, "Where are we?" Seeing that Kevin was still disoriented from what he went through, I pointed towards the purple portal and said, "We are still at the entrance of the portal." Entrance? Looking around, Kevin soon noticed that he was indeed back inside of the cave that led to the portal. Glancing at the purple portal that shone brightly, a complicated look appeared on Kevin's face. As he recalled the old man in his dreams, he couldn't help ask to himself. Was that the true Levi Shaw style? After going through numerous trails, Kevin passed out and found himself inside of a strange white world where an old man stood. Shortly after he appeared in the world, Kevin witnessed the old man perform every stance of the Levi Shaw style, including the last stance, the 6th, 4th stance, and last stance of the Levi Shaw style. I am boundless. Recalling the 64th strike performed by Grandmaster Levi Shaw as he used all of his life energy in order to perform it, Kevin couldn't help but shudder as he thought to himself. Can I do it? Closing his eyes, Kevin imagined himself performing the 64 stances. Closing his eyes, he tried recalling the sensation that Grandmaster Levi Shaw felt as he performed the last stance. From his muscle movement, breathing pattern, his demeanor, Kevin tried to recall everything that he saw within his dream. Now that his mind was lucid, he tried his best to engrave every minute detail into his brain. Shortly after, Kevin envisioned himself performing the 64 stances. However, right after the 8th stance, Kevin's brows knit tightly. As he continuously practiced the Levi Shaw style in his mind, the only thing Kevin could envision was his body exploding into millions of pieces as soon as he finished the 8th stance. The 8th stance, that was his current level. Frowning hard, Kevin shook his head. He still had a long way to go before being able to come close to performing the 64th stance. Moreover, unlike Grandmaster Levi Shaw who had to sacrifice his life in order to perform such art, Kevin wanted to do it without sacrificing his life force. He wanted to perfect it. Oi, answer me. Snapping Kevin out of his thoughts was my annoyed voice. Calling out for Kevin who was deep into his own world, I shook my head and said, I don't know about you, but if I'm late for class, I might get myself in an annoying situation, so hurry up and get ready. We have one day to get back to the academy. Oh, sorry. Let's go. Nodding his head, Kevin was reminded of the fact that the lectures indeed resumed tomorrow. Thus, without complaining, Kevin stood up and patted his body. After making sure I didn't forget anything, looking at Kevin, I nudged my head and walked towards the tunnel that led to the pond. Let's hurry up, or we might miss the train. Coming. Nodding his head, Kevin followed me towards the path. However, just as he was about to leave, Kevin recalled something. Halting his steps and turning around, he bowed towards the portal and softly said, Thank you, I will make sure to carry out your legacy spectacularly. Thereafter, he left and entered the dark tunnel. Silence and tranquility once again returned in the surroundings. Gotcha. However, a couple of hours after Kevin left, the purple hue around the portal started fluctuating madly as the portal everything started to tremble. Rumble. The cave shook and everything started to slowly crumble as large rocks fell down onto the ground. After almost half a day of walking, Kevin and I were finally in the clear as we exited the dungeon. This time, because I wanted to get out as fast as possible, using the book, I avoided all possible dangers and chose the fastest possible route to the exit. Moreover, as I knew the way back due to me remembering how we got here, I was able to save time as I didn't need to constantly look at the map. Thus, not long after we left the dungeon, we were already back in the town of Roa. Roa was a small town that inhabited 50,000 people and was built on the Clayton Ridge. The town was fairly beautiful as greenery could be found everywhere. Moreover, the fresh air and beautiful architectural structures of the town made this place look extremely lovely. The whitewashed houses that filled the town were especially beautiful, but that wasn't what truly made this town stand out. No, it was that the structures were built directly into the rocky cliffs surrounding the Clayton Ridge area. This resulted in a beautiful natural rock formation hanging over the streets, providing shade and stunning views of the mountains and scenery below. Admiring the scenery and walking along the cobblestone streets of Roa, Kevin glanced at me and asked, "What time is the train?" Checking my watch, I calmly responded, "In about an hour." Nodding his head, and placing his hand on his chin as he fell into deep contemplation, Kevin thought for a moment before suggesting, "Should we just wait at the train station then?" Similarly placing my hand on my chin, I nodded my head. Let's do that then. Though we could have gone to eat at a restaurant nearby, because the train was in an hour, it was better to just directly go to the train station. Didn't want to lose the train ride because the food took too long to arrive. Plus, I wasn't even that hungry, to begin with. As we were walking, glancing towards my surroundings, I couldn't help but notice that there were fewer and fewer people on the streets. Soon, a couple of minutes after I noticed this fact, no one was within our sights. Everything was deserted. Almost as if every person from the face of this world disappeared. Frowning deeply, I couldn't help but say, "Why is everything so quiet around here?" Glancing around, Kevin too noticed the changes as a deep frown also appeared on his face. "Now that you mention it, it is indeed quite, huh?" Not even halfway through his sentence, the world around Kevin and I distorted. Vroom. Thereafter, a large invisible dome appeared covering the area where Kevin and I were. Seeing the dome, Kevin couldn't help but shout as he quickly summoned his sword and took a stance. "A dimensional space, crap, it's an ambush." Opening my eyes wide, I couldn't help but freeze for a split second. Shortly after, looking at Kevin next to me who was ready in a battle position, I couldn't help but think to myself, "Why is this happening? This scene never appeared in the novel."